I want to share a quote that I love by Rupi Kaur, the poet and author. And she said, "How you love yourself is how you teach other people how to love you." And that's one of my favorite ones because it really is about your relationship with yourself that shows people how to relate to you, how to connect with you. It shows people what's okay and what's not okay. So loving yourself is really a place to start because, honestly, your relationship with yourself gives you the confidence. It gives you an understanding of who you are, what you like, what you don't like. And learning to love yourself is really about first dating yourself, knowing who you are, and then allowing yourself to show all of that to somebody else and feeling safe in doing so. So I really do believe that, investing in our relationship with ourselves is how we have these healthier relationships with other people. Now, of course, a lot of people think that self-love is selfish. It's all about you, but it's actually the opposite. The better you know yourself, the better you show yourself to other people truly as you are. And you do it in a way that, you're not afraid to be who you are. You don't have to apologize. You don't have to shrink or hide or be someone you're not. The more you embrace self-love, the more likely you are to let people see all of you and to feel good about who you are when you're relating with someone else. The other thing that I think is very important to understand is that when you love yourself, you're actually learning to give yourself everything you need to be complete. Now, we've watched all these Hollywood movies that say things like the other person needs to complete us, but really we have to be complete within ourselves to bring that energy into a relationship with somebody else. Not for someone else to try to complete us, because that means we are incomplete or we are not whole. And really self-love is being able to complete yourself by meeting your own emotional needs, by being there for yourself in whichever way you need. Maybe you need your cheerleader self today. Like I'm going up and speaking in front of people. I need my cheerleader to be like, "Sanaya, you've got this, you're amazing." Or sometimes I need the part of me that's going to say, "It's going to be okay." I need that believer in me, who's going to say, "It's all going to work out at the end." So we need these different aspects of ourselves to show up so that we can kind of be the best that we can be in every aspect of our life. I have so many clients who struggle with the inner critic. That is something that is very, very common. Now, the first thing that I do with a lot of my clients is I explain the concept between the gap and the gain. So this is actually based on a book written by Dan Sullivan. It's called The Gap and the Gain. And the shift really is about not looking at where you are as far from the ideal. Right? So for example, if I'm at this point in my life, but I want to be somewhere else, and I look at where I want to be, right? Then I'm in the gap because I'm not there. I'm here, I want to be at this ideal and I haven't reached there. So I'm in the gap. And every time you're in the gap, you're never going to be happy. There's always going to be something to criticize or something to be unhappy about. But if instead you shift your mindset to look at where you started and where you are right now, then suddenly you're in the game. Because if you look backwards, you're always going to be ahead. But if you keep looking forward, you're always going to be behind. So just making that shift from how far you still have to go and shifting to, well, I've actually come this far, can help you switch from that inner critic to kind of just acknowledging, sometimes even celebrating, that you've actually come this far or you've actually made this effort. So that's the first perspective shift that I've seen make a huge difference for the people I work with. Now, tied to that is actually another strategy that I'd love to share, which is about turning your inner critic into what I call is your inner coach. So every time you're going to criticize yourself for doing something wrong or not as you expected or wanted, shifting to the inner coach would be the voice of kindness. Well, okay, like how would you speak to someone you love? How would you speak to a friend? It's kind of that very kind, like you did great, you put in your best. So really moving from that critical, angry, frustrated, negative voice to that more loving, kind, supportive, coaching voice. So I just tell people, go from the inner critic to the inner coach. And somehow it's just, it's something people can kind of really relate to. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, this is how I would talk to myself if I was my own coach. So that's the other thing that I've seen really help. But now if you want to go a little deeper than that, then I'm going to drop something a little bit more advanced. And that's just asking the question, whose voice is that? That inner critic. Whose voice is that really? Is that my ex's voice? Is that my mother's voice? Is that my brother's voice? Who was the one who was critical of me? Or is that my father's voice? And you'll find that the inner critic is often you taking on that critical voice that you heard at some point in your life, more often than not in your childhood. So you've taken it on. So for example, if you had a very strict father and your father was always scolding you to get better grades or to do better, then that maybe, motivated you to do better in school, maybe because you were scared of him. So you just studied harder to get better grades. In the same way, you have now taken the place of your father, and now you're using that inner voice, that inner critic, to motivate yourself to do better. But you got to trade that in for the inner coach instead, right? Because you're more likely to get positive, good results if you have a supportive kind of partner in your own mind rather than that negative voice. So sometimes when you realize it's not your own voice and it's somebody else's you're echoing, you start to realize, I don't want that anymore. I don't want to be that. And you start to kind of just separate. So those are 3 strategies that I think can really help you overcome that inner critic voice. So, there was an example that I heard from somebody else that really landed with me, and I'd love to share that with all the listeners. So if you have a child, right, and your child is in a preschool, right, the preschool has a playground. Now, of course, you'd want your child to be able to play freely in the playground, but you'd also want to make sure that they're safe and they're not running out onto the streets and there aren't any strangers coming in, or, you obviously want them to stay safe. So imagine a playground that has like an enclosure or like a fence around it. So now your children have like all this space to play as much as they want in that playground, but they're also contained in the space, and you're making sure they're not kind of going out of that space and being exposed to any kind of danger, right? So in the same way, boundaries actually give you space and freedom to engage with people in a much safer way. It allows both people or multiple people engaging in that communication or conversation or interaction to understand what are the rules of engagement. How do we respect each other so that there's a sense of safety and security? And everybody knows what's okay, and everybody individually also feels respected in that space. So that's really what boundaries are. They tell other people how you'd like to be treated, and they also help you treat people in a way that makes them feel comfortable. Now, the problem with not having boundaries, when we're constantly saying yes to other people, when we are, crossing our boundaries to please other people at our expense, we end up feeling emotionally drained. We end up feeling resentful. We end up feeling disconnected from what our needs are. So when we don't respect these boundaries, we end up actually feeling just not very positive towards the other person. And we actually get angry at ourselves for allowing this transgression or, this trespassing of our boundaries to happen. So at the end of it, you're left angry at yourself and angry at the other person who crossed your boundaries. So really, being able to communicate your boundaries by simply saying yes and no, walking away when you need to, staying when it feels comfortable. All of these are the ways you communicate your boundaries to other people. And I think it's very, very important, whether you're relating with people you love or even people you don't know really well, to make sure that these boundaries are very clear from the beginning. I want to start with really understanding why most of us cannot love ourselves the way we need to. And it really comes back to our past experiences. So most of us are carrying these inner blocks that stop ourselves from loving ourselves completely. These inner blocks could be past rejection. It could be childhood wounds and trauma. It could be moments where we weren't worthy, or we failed, or we made a fool of ourselves. Somewhere where we feel that we haven't done enough to be worthy to earn our own love. And so a lot of us accumulate these experiences from the past. It could be even family members telling us we're not good enough, or being bullied in school. So all these different experiences stop us from actually loving ourselves the way we really should. So the bulk of what I do is helping people remove all of these things that have shaped their relationship with themselves, their understanding of their selves, and ultimately their own self-worth. So I do a lot of work with inner child kind of techniques. I do work with childhood trauma. I basically help people release all of this baggage so they can see themselves for who they are, which is this pure being of just love. And they deserve to be loved as much as anyone else in their life. So by letting go of these old stories, these influences, these narratives that we carry, we can see ourselves for who we are. And that's where real self-love begins. Because if you can't love and accept yourself the way you are, then how are you going to expect somebody else to, right? So you need to have your own love and acceptance to even receive that from someone else, or allow yourself to even get that from anyone else.